September 7th, 1940. Southern England. The sirens begin just after dusk. They rise in a wavering howl that cuts through the low cloud and damp air, rolling over terraced houses, factory yards, and RAF airfields alike. Inside a dim operations room near Biggin Hill, Flight Lieutenant Arthur Collins presses his headset tighter against his ears. Cigarette smoke hangs beneath the ceiling lamps. Chalk dust coats the floor. Somewhere outside, the first distant thumps of high explosives echo across the countryside. On the plotting table in front of him, small wooden blocks slide slowly across a map of southeast England. Each block represents a formation of German bombers crossing the Channel. Heinkel He-111s, Dornier Du-17s, Ju-88s, invisible in the darkness, their engines droning steadily toward London. This is night fighting, and in 1940, Britain is nearly blind. Collins listens to the clipped voices coming through the headphones. Ground observers strain to spot silhouettes against the moonlit clouds. Early warning radar stations along the coast, the Chain Home network, have already done their job. They've given Britain precious minutes of warning. But once the bombers pass inland and descend, Chain Home loses them. Its wavelength is too long, its resolution too crude. Now the burden shifts to the night fighter squadrons. Vectoring 1 Bow fighter, bearing 085, Angels 10. Somewhere overhead, a Bristol Bow fighter claws into the darkness, its pilot relying almost entirely on instructions barked from the ground. The aircraft carries one of Britain's newest secrets, airborne interception radar. But the set is bulky, unreliable, and frustratingly imprecise. The cathode ray screen flickers. Blips merge and vanish. A bomber might be 2 miles away, or 500 yards. Too often, the result is the same. The night fighter passes through empty air, while German bombs fall unchallenged. Collins exhales slowly. He knows the numbers. Night interceptions succeed less than 10% of the time. Crews land with fuel gauges near zero and no kills to report. London burns anyway. What Collins does not know, what almost no one in that room knows, is that the solution to this problem is already sitting on a workbench in a university laboratory hundreds of miles away. Not in a military base, not in a weapons factory, but in the hands of civilian scientists who were never meant to change the course of the war. 2 weeks earlier, Birmingham University. The laboratory smells faintly of oil, hot metal, and ozone. Professor Mark Oliphant stands with his sleeves rolled up, staring at a small copper device no larger than a loaf of bread. Beside him, John Randall and Harry Boot make final adjustments, their fingers blackened from days of fine machining and soldering. The device is ugly, almost crude, a block of copper drilled through with a ring of precise cavities, wires protruding at awkward angles. But when power is applied, it does something no radar component has ever done before. It generates microwaves of astonishing power. "Switch on," Randall says quietly. The hum deepens, the meters jump. Oliphant's eyes widen. The readings climb past expectations, past theoretical limits. The output is not just higher, it's orders of magnitude stronger. For a moment, no one speaks. They all understand what this means. Radar, until now, has been constrained by wavelength. Long waves mean large antennas and poor resolution. Aircraft appear as vague smudges. Targets blur together. You can tell something is out there, but not exactly where or what. This changes everything. Shorter wavelengths mean sharper images, narrow beams, precise range and bearing. Radar that can fit into the nose of an aircraft. Radar that can pick a single bomber out of a crowded sky. The cavity magnetron is not just an improvement, it is a leap. and Britain desperately needs it. By October 1940, the Blitz is at its height. German bombers return night after night, navigating by radio beams and city lights. British night fighters struggle to intercept. Anti-aircraft guns fire blind barrages, hoping for luck rather than certainty. Inside the Air Ministry, the question is no longer whether Britain has a breakthrough, but whether it can exploit it in time. The magnetron is powerful, but it is also delicate. Producing it in quantity will require industrial capacity Britain no longer possesses. Factories are already working around the clock to replace aircraft losses. Skilled machinists are in short supply. Copper itself is rationed. There is only one answer: share the secret. It is a decision without precedent. In July 1940, a small delegation quietly boards a ship bound for North America. In their luggage, wrapped in plain paper and unmarked crates, is the most valuable piece of technology Britain has ever created. When they arrive in Washington, they present it to stunned American engineers. "This," one British officer says, tapping the copper block, "is the war." The Americans test it, retest it, then sit in silence as the implications sink in. They can mass-produce this. They can miniaturize it. They can put it everywhere, on aircraft, ships, submarines. The night sky will never be the same. Back in England, Arthur Collins has no idea any of this is happening. He is still standing in the operations room, listening to reports of fires in the East End and fighters returning empty-handed. But somewhere beyond the smoke and noise of the war, the balance is already shifting. The enemy still believes darkness is his ally. It won't be for much longer. October 19th, 1940. Washington, D.C. A grey morning settles over the capital as a black government sedan rolls to a stop outside the Naval Research Laboratory. Inside the back seat, Sir Henry Tizard adjusts his hat and glances once more at the briefcase resting on his knees. It does not look important. No markings, no guards. Just leather, scuffed at the corners. But what it contains is worth more than any battleship floating in the Atlantic. The cavity magnetron. Tizard steps out into the cool air, flanked by two American officers whose expressions betray polite curiosity rather than urgency. The United States is not yet at war. The bombers over London feel very far away here. But that illusion will not survive the day. Inside a secure laboratory, American scientists gather around a long table. Oscilloscopes hum softly. Chalkboards are already crowded with equations. Vannevar Bush stands near the back, arms folded, watching closely. "Gentlemen," Tizard begins, his voice measured, "we are going to show you something." The British engineers unpack the device with deliberate care. Copper gleams under fluorescent light. The Americans lean forward as power is applied. The meters spike. A murmur ripples through the room. One engineer shakes his head slowly. "That output, it shouldn't be possible." But it is, and within minutes, the room fills with overlapping questions about stability, cooling, frequencies, scalability. The British answer what they can. For the rest, they simply gesture toward the magnetron itself. "Build it," Randall says. "And see," the Americans do. Within weeks, laboratories at MIT, Bell Labs, and General Electric are running their own versions. The United States has the industrial depth Britain lacks. Machine tools, copper supplies, skilled technicians untouched by bombing. What Britain invented, America can multiply. By early 1941, the radiation laboratory at MIT becomes the nerve center of a revolution. Engineers work in shifts that blur day and night, refining waveguides, shrinking antennas, and solving problems that had stumped radar designers for years. The goal is clear: radar that sees in the dark as clearly as daylight. March 1941. RAF West Malling, Kent. Squadron leader Peter Cunningham climbs into the cockpit of his Bristol Beaufighter, the metal skin cold beneath his gloves. Behind him, his radar operator straps in, eyes already flicking toward the small circular screen mounted beside him. This is different from the old sets. Smaller, cleaner, more precise. The antenna no longer sticks awkwardly from the aircraft's nose like insect legs. The magnetron allows a compact dish hidden inside the fuselage. Less drag, more speed, and most importantly, clarity. Set live, the operator says. The screen blooms into focus. For the first time, the airspace ahead is not a smear of noise, but a landscape of defined returns. One contact stands out sharply, moving at bomber speed. Range 4 miles. Target acquired, the operator reports, voice steady but tight with excitement. Cunningham nudges the throttles forward. The Beaufighter surges ahead, engines roaring. There is no need to rely on ground controllers now. The hunter sees his prey. At 1 mile, the radar return swells. At 500 yards, Cunningham spots it. The dark shape of a Heinkel bomber sliding through the clouds, unaware. Cannons flash. The bomber erupts in flame. It is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is technology. That night, interception rates double. Within months, they triple. German crews begin reporting something new in their debriefs. Fighters that appear without warning. Attacks from below, from behind, from angles that should be impossible in darkness. Some crews whisper about British pilots who can see in the night. They are not wrong. By the summer of 1941, magnetron-based radar spreads beyond Britain. Coastal Command aircraft sweep the Atlantic, their radars slicing through fog and darkness to find U-boats running on the surface. Escorts no longer guess where submarines might be. They know. A U-boat captain surfaces at night, confident in the ocean's vastness. Moments later, radar-guided aircraft roar out of the darkness, dropping depth charges with lethal precision. Losses mount. Admiral Dönitz demands answers. His commanders insist nothing has changed. Allied technology should not allow this level of detection. But it has, and it came from a civilian laboratory, from men who never wore uniforms, from a copper block drilled with holes. Back in Britain, Arthur Collins stands once more in an operations room. But this one feels different. The map is alive with certainty. Vectors are short and precise. Fighters intercept before bombers reach their targets. London still burns. The war is far from over. But the night no longer belongs solely to the enemy. Somewhere in the darkness, radar beams, invisible, silent, are cutting paths through the sky, turning ignorance into knowledge, and knowledge into power. The Allies have learned how to see, and once you can see, you can kill. February 2nd, 1942. Over the North Sea. Snow streaks across the windscreen of a de Havilland Mosquito as it slices through the darkness at 18,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, Flight Lieutenant Edward Ted Marshall keeps his hands steady on the controls while his navigator leans close to the radar scope, eyes locked on the glowing green circle. The scope is alive. A sharp, unmistakable return pulses near the center, clean, isolated. Moving fast. Contact bearing 090, range 3 miles, the navigator says. Marshall does not look outside. There is nothing to see yet. He trusts the machine. This radar is not British-built. Not entirely. Its heart, the cavity magnetron, was born in a university lab, refined in Britain, and then reborn in American factories by the tens of thousands. Now it sits inside the nose of one of the fastest aircraft in the world, transforming the Mosquito from a bomber into a hunter. The German bomber ahead never hears them coming. At half a mile, Marshall catches sight of exhaust flames flickering like dying candles. He rolls in behind the target, aligns the gun sight, and squeezes the trigger. The night explodes in orange fire. The bomber breaks apart, fragments tumbling into the black sea below. For Marshall, it is another mission completed. For the Luftwaffe, it is another mystery. Across occupied Europe, German commanders pore over loss reports that no longer make sense. Bombers are being intercepted far from their targets. Fighters appear with impossible precision. Radio silence offers no protection. Cloud cover no longer hides formations. Something has changed. At Luftwaffe headquarters, engineers test countermeasures, jamming signals, changing routes, altering altitudes. Nothing works for long. Allied radar adapts faster than German tactics can evolve. The problem is not just detection, it is resolution. Old radar had told defenders that something was out there. Magnetron-powered radar tells them exactly where, and keeps telling them as the target moves. It guides fighters into perfect firing position. It directs anti-aircraft guns with uncanny accuracy. It allows bombers to find targets through cloud, smoke, and darkness. Night is no longer protection. It is a vulnerability. August 1942, Atlantic Ocean. A convoy plows westward through heavy seas, its ships blacked out, decks slick with spray. Below the waves, a German U-boat commander listens to the steady thrum of engines overhead and decides to surface. His batteries are low. His men are exhausted. The night feels safe. He is wrong. High above, an American B-24 Liberator patrols in darkness, its crew guided not by moonlight, but by radar pulses racing invisibly across the ocean. The magnetron-driven radar paints a crisp image of a submarine cutting through the water, wake trailing clearly behind it. "Target confirmed," the radar operator says. Flares burst into the night, turning the sea white. Depth charges follow seconds later. The submarine shudders, ruptures, and vanishes. This scene repeats itself again and again across the Atlantic. By late 1942, U-boat losses climb sharply. Convoys once ravaged now cross with fewer ships missing. Supplies reach Britain in volumes Germany believed impossible. The magnetron is doing more than winning duels in the air. It is sustaining an entire war effort. By 1943, Allied radar has become a system rather than a tool. Airborne sets talk to ground stations. Ships share contact information. Bombers use radar to find cities through cloud layers that once guaranteed safety. Pathfinders mark targets with radar guidance, turning night bombing into a calculated operation rather than blind area attacks. German cities burn under clouds that once would have saved them. And still, the origin of this power remains largely invisible. There are no parades for physicists, no medals for machinists. Randall and Boot return quietly to academic life. American engineers move on to the next project. The magnetron becomes classified, its story buried beneath layers of secrecy. But in the cockpits, on the bridges, and inside dim radar rooms, the effect is undeniable. The war has changed shape. The darkness itself has been weaponized. November 18th, 1943. Berlin. Snow clings to the edges of bomb-scarred streets as Major Wilhelm Kruger steps into a reinforced concrete building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air smells of damp coats, overheated electronics, and frustration. This is one of the Luftwaffe's radar development centers, and lately it feels less like a laboratory than a crime scene. Kruger removes his gloves and stares at the latest loss figures pinned to a corkboard. Night fighters downed, bombers destroyed before reaching their targets, U-boats failing to return. The numbers climb relentlessly. "Explain it to me again," he says quietly. An engineer clears his throat. "Herr Major, their radar resolution is beyond ours. They can isolate individual aircraft, even in formation, even in cloud." Kruger already knows the answer. What he wants is a solution. German radar, like Britain's early chain home, was built around long wavelengths. It is powerful, yes, but blunt. Large antennas, broad beams, useful for warning, useless for precision interception. German scientists have experimented with shorter wavelengths, but progress is slow. Components overheat. Signals collapse. Production tolerances are unforgiving. What Germany lacks is not intelligence. It lacks time, and it lacks a magnetron. Captured Allied equipment begins arriving from crash sites across Europe. Radar units smashed by impact, cables torn loose, housings bent and burned. German technicians work painstakingly to reconstruct what they can. They identify waveguides, power supplies, rotating antennas, but the heart is missing. Again and again, reports return with the same conclusion: performance impossible without a high-power microwave source. One engineer writes bitterly in his notebook, "The enemy sees us before we see him, always." Attempts to jam Allied radar bring only fleeting success. New frequencies appear almost immediately. Narrower beams reduce vulnerability. Each German countermeasure is met with a faster Allied adaptation. The imbalance grows. January 1944, RAF Bomber Command Headquarters. Air Vice Marshal Robert Saundby studies a radar map illuminated by soft red light. On it, thin lines trace the flight paths of hundreds of bombers crossing the North Sea toward Germany. Cloud cover blankets the continent, conditions that once would have forced a mission abort. Now it barely matters. Magnetron-based radar allows Pathfinder aircraft to identify cities through overcast skies, rivers through smoke, industrial districts through darkness. Markers fall with increasing accuracy. The bomber streams follow, guided by instruments rather than sight. Saundby turns to an aide. "The weather would have saved them 2 years ago," he says. The aide nods. "Not anymore, sir." That night, bombs fall with grim precision. German air defenses respond, but they are reacting rather than controlling. Fighters scramble late. Flak fires blind. Radar superiority has inverted the equation. The Allies choose when and where the night will matter. On the ground, German civilians feel the difference before they understand it. Sirens sound later. Shelters fill faster. Fires spread wider. Rumors circulate that the British can see through roofs, through clouds, through smoke itself. It is not superstition. It is physics. By the spring of 1944, magnetron-driven radar has become routine across Allied forces. It no longer feels miraculous. Crews complain when it malfunctions. Commanders plan operations assuming its availability. In the English Channel, invasion preparations proceed under a constant umbrella of radar coverage. Landing craft movements are tracked. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights are intercepted almost as soon as they lift off. German commanders sense the build-up, but cannot see it clearly enough to stop it. On June 5th, as weather delays the largest amphibious invasion in history, Allied radar stations watch the channel continuously. Storms sweep across the water. Cloud ceilings drop dangerously low. The magnetrons keep working. When the invasion finally launches, radar guides ships through darkness and fog. It warns of German E-boats. It coordinates air cover. It protects the fragile bridgehead until daylight arrives. D-Day does not belong to radar alone, but radar makes its chaos manageable. Back in Berlin, Major Kruger receives one final report before Allied forces cross the Rhine. German engineers have produced a prototype short-wavelength radar source. It works. Briefly. It overheats. It fails. Production is impossible under bombing. Copper is scarce. Skilled labor, scarcer still. Kruger closes the folder. The war has already been decided in places far from the front lines, in laboratories, workshops, and factories that were never meant to fight wars at all. A civilian invention has outpaced a military empire, and the darkness once Germany's ally has turned against it. May 7th, 1945, southern Germany. Rain falls steadily on a muddy airfield as a tired RAF Mosquito rolls to a stop, its engines coughing into silence. The war in Europe is ending. Crews climb down from aircraft that no longer need to fly into darkness hunting invisible enemies. Some smile. Some simply sit on the wing, too exhausted to feel relief yet. Inside the operations hut, a radar screen glows softly. Still on, still sweeping the sky out of habit. The operator stares at it for a moment, then switches it off. For the first time in years, the night feels empty. Across Europe, the same quiet is settling in. The Luftwaffe is broken, the U-boat arm shattered. German cities lie in ruins, their defenses outmatched long before the final battles were fought. And yet, as Allied soldiers push deeper into the Reich, what they find surprises many of them. German radar rooms, German research facilities, German engineers who knew what they needed but never managed to build it in time. In one captured laboratory, an American officer lifts a dusty blueprint from a table. The sketches are familiar. Waveguides, cavities, power coupling diagrams. They are close. Painfully close. But close is not enough. In Britain, the men who created the cavity magnetron return quietly to civilian life. There are no victory headlines bearing their names, no dramatic photographs. Much of their work remains classified, locked behind Official Secrets Acts and security clearances. John Randall resumes academic research. Harry Boot returns to teaching. Mark Oliphant moves on to new scientific challenges. They do not speak publicly about how their invention reshaped the war. But the legacy spreads anyway. In the months after victory, Allied forces infantry captured German equipment. One pattern emerges again and again. German radar could warn, but not guide. Detect, but not strike decisively. It lacked the precision that tells to tools information into action. That precision belonged to the magnetron. It belonged to the ability to generate powerful, stable microwaves, short enough to sharpen radar into a scalpel rather than a hammer. With it, radar became more than a warning system. It became a weapon. It guided fighters to bombers, bombers to cities, ships to submarines, and armies across seas in total darkness. What began as a civilian experiment became the nervous system of Allied warfare. By the late 1940s, the secrecy begins to lift. Radar spreads into civilian aviation. Weather forecasting improves dramatically. Air traffic control becomes possible on a global scale. Even microwave ovens trace their lineage back to the same principles unlocked by that copper block in a Birmingham laboratory. The war is over, but its technologies are everywhere. Most people never learn where they came from. They do not picture John Randall hunched over a lathe, or Harry Boot filing copper cavities by hand, or British officers quietly handing America the most dangerous invention they possessed because survival demanded trust. But without that choice, without that invention, the war's nights would have looked very different. Somewhere, long after the last bomb has fallen, a former Luftwaffe pilot reflects on the war in a post-war interview. "We thought the night protected us," he says. "We believed darkness was our shield." He pauses. "We were wrong. Darkness did not betray Germany. Science did. And it came not from a battlefield, but from a university workshop, where civilians learned how to make the invisible visible and changed the war forever.